Noam Dar, welcome to the Development by David podcast, my friend. How are you?
Good, David. Good. How are you? Good morning.
Mate, amazing. It's quite funny. I bumped into you in a restaurant last night, and I couldn't
Yeah,
believe
less
that.
than 12 hours ago. We should have done an interview last night.
No, we definitely shouldn't have, mate. We definitely shouldn't. I had a full belly and a few pints, but I just couldn't believe that you were so close to home still. Like a WWE wrestler that I look up to on social media was still kicking around there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been based here since the start of 2020. Obviously, working with NXT UK. Being based in the UK is obviously way more beneficial, and being at home has been amazing as well. I moved to America at quite a young age, so being able to be based here, see family, see friends, and obviously still work with WWE has been amazing.
Does it keep you quite humbled still kicking around there from where you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that though. I like kind of building that into my life. I've always tried to keep humility at the forefront of what I do for sure. And like I don't really ever look at it too much as a difference from where I was in America. Like my life stays the same in terms of what I do and what I'm interested in. Obviously, just the environment slightly different, but it's all based in doing what I need to do on a daily basis and spending time with loved ones. That's I like my life in a simple elegant way like that, David.
I love that, mate. I love it. You weren't born in there. You moved when you were a child, right? Where were you brought up?
I was born in Tel Aviv in Israel, and I lived there till I was about 4, and then moved over here when I was kind of 4.5, just before my 5th birthday. Or 4 and 9/10. You'll be accurate with it. And my mum's Scottish and my dad's Israeli, and my mum grew up in Israel, so that's how they met, and kind of moved over here. So swapped 40 degrees for 2 degrees.
From -4 degrees. How did your parents meet? How did that come around in Israel then?
So that's actually pretty funny. I was talking to my mum the other week there about it, and she used to babysit my dad's nephew and niece, also my cousins. She was best friends with my dad's uncle's ex-wife, and they kind of met by chance on the beach one time, and then that same day they went out for a date, and that was then pretty much kind of hooked from there.
Wow.
And they said, I mean, I did ask her if it was a good first date. She said, clearly, as she pointed at me. So I'm glad my dad's got game. Thanks, Dad.
Mate, I'm sure he's passed that on to you as well, mate.
Yeah, well, I don't know, has he? She laughs in shock.
Do you remember much of life in Israel, or were you too young to remember what it was like living there as a child?
Before 5, I don't remember too much. Obviously, certain kind of memories are strong, but for the most part, not really. I'd probably say my memories start kicking in age like 6, 7 when I was over here. But I used to go back and forth to Israel every year to visit family. I've not been since 2015, but I'm actually going next month, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, nice, mate. Nice one. Did you find it hard as a child to integrate in Scotland, being from Israel?
I mean, I guess I must have, because I didn't speak English until I came here. So English was my second language. Well, English was my third language. Scottish was second. Hebrew was first. So I think the hardest thing was probably just trying to get a name like Noam past Scottish folk. So school was fun. Kids are inventive, mate. There's a lot of things you can do with the name Noam.
What was the worst you got?
Let's go right off the top of my head. It's not like I'm holding on to these traumatic moments. Let's go. It was no ham in the fridge was good, which is also really funny because they wouldn't have realised they were doing it then, but it's like double-ended because it's no ham in the fridge is a nice play on the name, and I'm Jewish, so there is no ham in the fridge.
Oh no!
So really, it's quite in depth. Garden Gnome was good. Naomi, classic. Norm, no arm. One boy, every time I saw him, would just change it, and he used to call me like. So for any non-Scottish listeners, a piece in Scotland is not a gun; it's just a sandwich. Okay, so chill out. But a piece in Scotland is a sandwich, and this guy used to call me no piece, which I thought was pretty good. Or then nay piece. And every time I saw him, he had a different version. And one time I went, "All right, Sean," and he went, "All right, je n'ai pas de piece." Because we just started French. what more do you need? So
Oh,
yeah.
mate, Scottish patter is unrivaled.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, it was
funny.
good stuff.
It's funny you say that though, like because you have a name that's not traditional for a kind of Scottish boy.
Hmm.
It's kind of weird how that's a parallel to like doing wrestling as a kid, right? Because
Oh yeah.
if you're not like a white football playing boy from the West Coast that supports Celtic or Rangers, you're a bit of an outcast, and everyone kind of
100%. Yeah, mate, and
100%,
I
man.
don't think people realise that is it's very. I mean, it is extremely tribal here with that type of stuff. And even at a young age, I knew that I was weird just for liking different music. Or I remember one time in primary four, which is maybe what age is that, 9 or something, and the teacher was asking everyone. The teacher was asking everyone what their favorite TV shows are, and everyone was saying, "Play Peter, Dick and Dom in the Bungalow," and I put my hands up and said EastEnders, and the whole class started laughing at me.
Your new
I was like,
nickname must have been Doc Cotton after that.
well, I'm not rotten, mate. That's and yeah, but to your point, I found that when I started liking wrestling, I had to kind of test the waters with friends or people that I thought may be interested in it because I'd already known it was something that was kind of like ridiculed in a lot of ways, or anything like you said that wasn't football was strange. I used to do judo, and even that was weird to people. And then once I started finding like a little circle of friends that that all liked wrestling, then we could have these little secret meetings and talk about it. And then once I started doing it, then game was a bogey at that point.
How did you get into it?
I started training. So I used to do backyard wrestling. A bunch of my mates in my little secret community I just told you about, and we used to. I mean, nothing too intense. It was on a trampoline. I took a choke slam onto the hard grass one time because it was raining, and we'd organised an event on a Sunday afternoon. It started raining, and the rest of the boys started becoming less enthusiastic. And obviously, I was passionate to the nines. And I was like, look, I'll take a choke slam in the floor right now. I will show you how easy it is in the rain. Who cares? Take a choke slam. I think like, yeah, I may have just dislocated a rib. You guys should go home. I'm going inside to play Halo. But so we used to do backyard wrestling. We had a little website. We made music videos. We had loads of different names for the paper. I mean, it was actually really serious when I think about it.
It was a whole business venture.
Oh, it was good, mate. We even ran a show one time, and it was just my mum and all our drunk mates during the summer watching us throw each other off trampolines. So, but for me at that point, like between watching wrestling and doing that, I didn't think I really needed much more of an outlet for wrestling because I felt like that was the capacity for like a boy from the west coast of Scotland. Like you said, that there's no route that if you want to do wrestling, or how can you even fathom it as a career? Like, how do you think of, okay, well, I know if I want to be a footballer, I know how to do it. Like, if I want to be a joiner, I know how to do it. But to be a wrestler is a bit insane. So I was happy enough just kind of doing that. And then one of the boys that I'd done it with, who was slightly older, he found a wrestling school in London. It's called Hammerlock. It's where Finn Balor came from, Johnny Moss, Doug Williams, Zack Sabre. So really prestigious. And he went down to do like a week-long camp. And he met someone down there that told him that there was a school in East Kilbride that ran every Sunday. So we went there once a week every Sunday, and that kind of rolled on from there. And I started getting into small trainee shows and then independent shows, and that was I started going there at December 2007. So it's like 13.
At that moment in time, though, I guess for me, I was a wrestling fanatic when I was 13, but I didn't see perhaps representation of someone that looked like me or sounded like me in the wrestling.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
I didn't really I didn't have role models to look up to really because we're worlds apart. But I think there was a moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a wrestler came to your school. Was it like Drew McIntyre came to your school?
Oh, yes, yeah,
and then
yeah.
that kind of sparked it for you because you're like, he sounds like me. He's from here. I could do what he's doing.
And that's where the relativity stopped. The only thing I could compare to Drew was he has an accent a little bit like mine and lives close because he's a superhuman. Like, and that actually, if anything, deflated my motivation for it because I was like, right, if you want to be a wrestler from Scotland, you need to look like actual William Wallace. He's 7 foot, jacked, just straight off a porridge box. So no, he done Drew came to Belmont Academy and done like a charity wrestling match. And at this point, I'd started training like professionally, if you will. So I knew a little bit of how sore it actually was, because there's this misconception that wrestling doesn't hurt in any way at all, and that it is just all trampoline based, like it was for me at first. But I'd done enough professional training to realise it wasn't the case. And obviously, the joke around school that day was that it was just going to be a bit of a laugh and a tickle and a joke. And he was wrestling Mr. McLean. Shout out Mr. McLean, computer teacher at Belmont, who used to do Mr. Olympia, right? So he was like 5'5" computer teacher, always had like tanned up, jacked, like the tightest shirt. And then you'd see him like go through his season as a bodybuilder. So like as he came to like contest time, he would just get stricter and you would get more homework and he'd be more angry. So but when he was bulking, he was in a good mood. So everyone was like, "Oh, Mr. McLean is gonna batter Drew. He's gonna be a man. He's gonna be a life out. Wrestling's fake. Wrestling's this. Wrestling's that." And we watched it. It was during lunchtime, and Drew just beat the life out of the community. Like it got awkward because everyone at first was like, "Hey, ha, 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 ha. You suck," and then 2 minutes later, everyone was trying to phone 999. So I think that was quite eye opening for a lot of people. Like they even had made a wrestling ring out of PE mats and then just janitor tape or something. And I think janitor stood in one of the corners because they only had 3 cones for turnbuckles. They just made one of the turnbuckles. But it was funny. It was a good day. And I got a picture with him after and met him. And I had like a little bad boy flip up phone. So I said, "Can I get a picture, mate?" And he went, "Yeah, sure." And he just stood and done a bicep pose to the camera. I was like, "Well, I kind of wanted to be in the picture with you, mate. I didn't mean just a picture of you, but also okay." And just take a picture of my wallpaper on my little flip up phone was Drew Galloway's arm for, I don't know, way too long like than it should have been.
At that age, people have like a Pokemon or Henrik Larsson or Barry Ferguson as their wallpaper, but you have a local wrestler's bicep.
Yeah, I know. So wild. It still has my wallpaper, to be fair. I haven't changed it.
Before it was Mr. McLean's bicep, so I guess it's one step above.
Yeah. No, it was funny, man. I wish I could go back to that day. It was funny. I hope there's footage somewhere. I think Mr. McLean still has PTSD from it. As he should. Don't mess with that, boys.
When I guess when John McIntyre, when Drew McIntyre came back to your school, but was quite Americanized with his voice, and you said you couldn't relate to him because of his stature and because he was much different to you. Did that deflate your dreams or kind of empower you? Like, how did it actually deflate you, or did it actually kind of egg you on to like double down on what you were doing?
So I don't know, let me just get the timeline right here. So this happened right as Drew got signed the first time, so it was before he went to America. But obviously he was just by nature quite Americanized because that was his influence and his goals. And at that time you really had to pretty much fit that mold. Obviously WWE and wrestling is very different now. But you're talking over 10 years ago. And he'd moved over, and then after a few months he'd come home for Christmas and he'd done a seminar at the school that I went to because it was the same school that he got trained at. And after me and one of the boys that I was training with and 2 of the coaches went for dinner at Moncton Lodge, Brewster Bear, shout out. And he was really friendly and really helpful and kind of gave us a bit of insight for what to do and what not to do. But I didn't even really rationalize myself as the same as him in any way. Like I didn't see the path there. So, and I never really, like if I think about it now, I never really had like, when you start wrestling, you obviously have an ambition of getting to WWE and main event WrestleMania and doing all that good stuff. But that's such a massive goal, and it is very like, it is a fantasy in some sense when you're starting. You have the delusions of it, but that's not what makes you do the things on a daily basis or on a weekly basis when you're at training. For me, it was more just these smaller goals that I was focused on. And I never really, whether I didn't really think it was realistic or I just was more invested in what I was doing, which was what was right in front of me. And that was like having training matches and doing them well and starting to go to the gym and do small independent shows and then do bigger independent shows and then, just be in that process of it. So I never I never had a thought at that age of being like, oh yeah, I'll just do this for a few years and then I'll go WWE and then that's it.
I've never heard of wrestling schools before. Like even
Mm.
now I have access to social media and I can learn about the kind of a route to entry. What is a wrestling school? Is it like the equivalent of a football club but wrestling, or is it actually a full on school?
Well, so first of all, it's a bit of a kind of wild west in the UK wrestling schools because there's not really a good standard in the sense of like a governing body that polices it all. So you have some really good wrestling schools, and then you have some proper shit ass ones that are not helpful at all to the scene and detrimental. But luckily, I went to a good school, and at least I thought so. And we always had a rotation of international seminars from all sorts of different talent and walks of life in wrestling, which was massively helpful. A good community to train with on a weekly basis. At first, it was just on judo mats. Like the first 6 months of my training was just on mats, which lends itself to the British style and the way that we do stuff in the UK is slightly different to American style wrestling. The first time I was actually in a wrestling ring was my first match on a show, and I didn't know how to hit the ropes. Like I hadn't done any rope running, and there is footage of it somewhere. And in my head, I was like, well, if I just run at them, and I knew that they shake and we need to move, so I would run at them and then like turn and stop, and then just like grab the rope and just shake it a little bit and then run back. So that was the first time I was in a ring, which I'm glad for now because it taught me fundamentals, and also part of that was a vetting process. You see if people, because everyone starts wrestling and think, oh, I'll get in the ring and I'll start doing backflips and stone cold stunners, and it's like, yeah, cool story, bro. There is no heating in here. There's cold mats. You're doing 7 hours of bump drills and takedowns. Have fun with that. See how much you want to be the Rock then. So it was a really good vetting process for people, and that is part of it also because the wrestling business historically has been difficult to get into, especially when, like in the earlier generations, it was a very secretive kind of brotherhood almost to get into because it was a protected industry in a lot of ways. But there's some good schools now in Scotland. I'd say that the one that comes to mind, a few of them, there's one in Fife called Fife Pro Wrestling Academy, and there's the one in Glasgow is the Glasgow Pro Wrestling Academy, or the Asylum. It has a nickname, so because everybody's absolutely mental.
What one did you go to? The one in Glasgow then?
Yeah, I went to PBW wrestling. So when I was in East Kilbride, I didn't go to the GPWA one.
Okay.
It moved. We started in the John something community centre in East Kilbride.
I think every community centre in Scotland is John something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. John's got a lot to answer for. I've seen every community centre in Scotland, mate. There's not a community centre that I've not been in. There's not a community centre I've not had one of those looking at sports in.
Oh mate. So a wrestling academy, what does it look like? Is it just like a once a week session? Or is it like you go for like an intense like 4 weeks and learn the whole kind of comprehensive package of what it takes to be a wrestler? What does it look like?
So it varies. So in the US, I know that it is more like that. Like you'll go for 4 to 6 week camps and you'll do training 4 or 5 times a week, and it'll kind of be all inclusive of the stuff that you need to learn, or at least the basic tools to start your wrestling career. Then over here, there's clubs that will offer a couple of days a week. The one that I went to specifically was just every Sunday, but it was 7 hours, so you got a lot of work done. And then you would do, usually good wrestling schools have connections to independent companies. So at the weekend you would go and do like security or sell merch or referee or do ring crew or anything to kind of help and pay your dues, and then obviously watch a show and learn and try and talk to people and hopefully work your way onto shows. So, but
is paying your dues not like a saying within the wrestling industry?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to, I think the best comparison to give it is you're just giving back really, or you're or not even giving back. I guess you're paying your dues. There's not really a better way of saying it. I don't have a better comparison, unfortunately. It is just showing respect to the industry and the people that are helping you and the people that are above you at that point in time, and obviously showing that you've got the right attitude. Respect is really big in wrestling. So if you're in the wrestling business and you don't have respect for who came before you and who's helping create the scene that you're in and who's also allowing you the opportunity to develop and progress, then you're kind of off to a bad start, I would say. So locker room etiquette and respect and paying your dues was something that was really one of the main guiding principles of the wrestling school that I went to, that they really taught us and kind of embedded into us, which I really was appreciative of. Like we got like paperwork with all the different kind of do's and don'ts if you're in a locker room, and all sorts of really useful information that I know most wrestling schools don't even pay much attention to now, because obviously it kind of goes hand in hand with, a lot of people think paying your dues is being like hazed, when really it's not. There's an unfortunate bleeding over of people that exploit it, and then people who then make themselves victims in situations because they have to do the ring, or they have to help, or they have to do something other than be in the main event, brother.
Yeah. When you're the wrestling skills, do you also learn, because from the outside in, it seems like there's more to wrestling than just the physicality of it. There's a whole kind of commercial aspect of it. The way you present yourself, your identity in the ring, kind of your communication, that kind of stuff. Do you learn all like the full kind of works of wrestling at that moment in time?
So I think, well, this is where the subjectivity of wrestling comes in, like, because wrestling is not one thing really. It's not just a sport. It's not just a show. You know, it's not just entertainment. It's not just combat theatre. Like, it's a combination of everything. And the fundamentals across the board stay the same, in terms of like the actual mechanics of stuff and learning the basics. But good wrestling skills, in my opinion, they facilitate an area where you can learn these things and practice them and understand them, and then allow your room to start being creative, or start trying to find your own identity, like you said, or try to find out what type of performer you would like to be, and how to best do that, and how to assimilate things that you're passionate about in real life into the presentation of the character, and whatever way you would like to. So it gets really difficult though, because in some sense a lot of this stuff you have to discover yourself. Obviously, good wrestling skills and good coaches will help kind of facilitate that, or will help guide you in the right direction. But for the most part, you really have to kind of sort a lot of that stuff out yourself. And specifically in WWE, the Performance Center in the US and the Performance Center in the UK, we do promo classes. There's different tools and stuff that you can use. There's online resources that can all help you package yourself beyond just being able to do the wrestling.
When did you kind of create your identity as a wrestler in the ring? Was it at these schools, or did it take you much longer to kind of embed into the kind of theme and presence that you have just now?
I would say that for me, most of that discovery and learning, it's obviously an ongoing process. I don't think it should ever stop if you're a performer in wrestling, because you change as a person. And for me, mostly it was doing independent shows and wrestling, and kind of learning on the job, if you will. Like I'd done 5 months of training at the wrestling school, and then started doing small training shows and small independent shows. So I was obviously always still going to training every Sunday, unless I was on the road like wrestling in England. But it was actually on shows and kind of being put in at the deep end that learning on the job really kind of made sure to, like, it expedited the process, and also kind of made it that I had to sink or swim.
When was your first big break into doing it kind of full time, or at least at a point where it seemed like I could do this full time and make a living out of it?
So this is quite a tough question, I guess, because I was lucky in the sense that I started wrestling really young. So even when I was 17, 18, I was wrestling every weekend, and I was down in England and wrestling a lot in Scotland. And by no means was I making any type of real money. I was making enough pocket money where I had, because I was still living at home, I had enough pocket money to like pay my phone bill, or if I wanted to get a coffee, or buy a new Fred Perry top, or pay my mum digs. But so it never really, like, I had a source of income from wrestling at a young age, and but it was never really like, oh, this is a full-time living, because I wasn't. I was just still a kid in a lot of ways. So I'd say probably, I guess, early 20s. That was when I was very much focused on it being a full-time living, and then obviously needed to because I had more financial responsibility at the time. But that was a combination of all sorts. When you're on independence, like you're wrestling, you can do 4 or 5 shows a week, you can sell merch, you can do this, you can do that, and it's very, I mean, it's very unsettling in a lot of ways in terms of like you don't have that financial security as such, but that's part of it. And I was never once did I ever feel like, oh, I want to trade this in for some other type of job. Like I was all about it.
We spoke about when you were younger trying to integrate because you were a wrestling fanatic as a kid. When you were turning like 18, 19, your mates were going out at the weekend to bars and clubs, and you were like on the road. Did you feel like a bit of a disconnect there? And how were you like accepted by your mates when you were back up the road? Were they quite accepting?
Yeah, so for me, the biggest moment that I felt that separation was maybe a little bit younger. It was kind of 16, 17 time where it started coming into like the important exam time, like your hires and stuff, and then your prom, and then that was the age that everyone was really starting to like be a bit more independent at the weekend socially, and it just didn't work for me in a bunch of reasons. Like obviously I was away most weekends, so I didn't want to go and drink in the park or drink at houses and do that. And not to say that, I mean, I'll quite happily do that. I'll go and drink in the park right now if you want me. But like, there's no,
we're a couple of miles away from each other. We could do it.
Yeah, there's no shade to that at all, man. But like at the time, I just knew it wasn't useful for me, and I obviously had other priorities. And once I started getting a little bit older and traveling every weekend, like I was wrestling all over the UK, and then I was enjoying the social life that came from that. Like we would wrestle, like we'd wrestle in Manchester and be done by 9 o'clock. Then I was having a night out in Manchester rather than having a night out up the road or like doing the same thing. So I was always still living that life, if you will, but in different places. So when I came home, it wasn't really like I was locking myself in a room and reading Mick Foley's book or something. I was still enjoying myself, and then going back, and my mates were kind of, at that point they had already now started to see that it was pretty cool. Like I would say the first between 13 to like 18, the first 5 years or so, it was very much, haha, this is stupid. And a lot of times it was like in a joking way. I've got a very supportive group of mates, and then anyone that did throw real shade, I would just not be around them. So it was always very much like a bit kind of tongue in cheek. Like if it, at lunchtime at school, everyone would be eating whatever they're having, and then I would pull out my chicken breast and couscous and my protein shake, and so like it was very much a bit of a healthy ribbon, if you will. But once I started getting 18, 19, I started doing cooler shows. I was able to show them like, look, I'm wrestling in nightclubs. So it's 300, 400 people. I'm not wrestling in the John whatever community centre in front of 40 people right now. So there seemed to be a bit of prestige to them in their eyes, and then that actually in turn made them a bit more supportive.
Man, that's good to hear. Is wrestling in the UK almost like the comedy scene? Because I know like the comedians have to do the circuit, they have to go around essentially all the comedy clubs, develop their material and hope for a break. Is that kind of like wrestling?
Yeah, for sure. There's comedy and wrestling are quite synonymous with each other in a lot of ways, because it is so subjective, and how to become successful, there's a million ways of doing it. Like if you play a sport, you either win or you lose, and then that kind of determines your outcome, if you will. But comedy, any type of entertainment source, really, it's more about getting those reps in and finding your feet, and then carving out your own little unique space. And comedians do that, of course. Like it's almost a science how comedians do it. They write all these jokes, and then the audience relays back to them what's funny and what's not funny, and then they cut away all the useless material. So in some sense, as an independent wrestler, or indeed any wrestler, if you're traveling around and you have like a market where you can do instant data feedback from them and see like, okay, I've done this last night, and it was received well and it worked well. Let me build on that. Let me put that into my act. Oh, that didn't really work, and it kind of is like it's a good dance almost between you and the audience. So that's what I found really useful for being on independence, that I was able to like test different things and see what would work and what type of audience it would work with, and when it wouldn't, and that was kind of invaluable, really. I always think that experience is the most invaluable commodity that you can have in wrestling, or probably really indeed in any walks of life, I'd imagine. But this is my life. So.
When I speak with comedians on the podcast, I always ask if they kind of develop their content dynamically in the moment when they're in front of different audiences. So did you find yourself leaning more into the Scottish aspect of your not character, but persona when you were in Scotland, and kind of fraying away from that when you were in London, for example?
Yeah, I played with it for sure. So to me, one of the most enjoyable things about being a wrestler is being in the moment and working with it, and that kind of splits opinion. Some people really like to have their stuff down and rehearsed, and this is what I'm doing and this is what it is. But I've always found it more enjoyable to have a bit more creative freedom in the moment and stuff. So if you're given these type of like signals from the audience, then you can take them and explore them. So you mentioned London. I remember one of the first times I wrestled in London. Like, I didn't realize I'd forgotten the cliche of being a Scottish person in England, and it was like deep fried Mars bar chants and haggis this and haggis that. I was like, my name's Noam Dar. Like, I don't even look a little bit Scottish. You should see some of the Scottish wrestlers that are up the road. You would all have a field day. But yeah, I was leaning into it for sure, and wrestling as well was the whole element of cheap heat, where you play off different nationalities or even different football teams. Then yeah, it's good fun.
I love it, mate. What do you think makes like you kind of spoke about carving your space. Like, what makes a kind of successful wrestler? Like, what enables a wrestler to get their break? I can't imagine it's just their sheer physicality or their moves. It must be much broader than that. What do you think is like these kind of secret sauce?
Well, obviously, it's a combination of a lot of factors, but fundamentally, I think as a performer, you have to feel like what you're performing as is either yourself turned up to 100 or an extension of yourself. You have to have some type of connection to what it is you're doing, rather than just kind of embodying an act or a gimmick or something that you think people are going to like, because then it's going to feel disingenuous. And there's enough elements in wrestling that are disingenuous, so any moments that are genuine are of the highest value, I think. So anyway, and you can connect to that, and you can look through the history of wrestling and see that is where we as fans connect to stuff, like whether we relate to them or we believe it, or the game is make believe, but when it's done well, we make you believe. So like that for me has to come from a place that you have to believe that yourself.
Mate, that's awesome. That's awesome. I remember, like, I seen you out last night and you were wearing like Stone Island, but you kind of play on that within like your persona as a wrestler. Like, how important is that to you? Because I think that's just awesome seeing that, like that representation of like kind of Scottish male culture outplayed in wrestling. I think it's just awesome to see, mate.
So for me, I find that what works well for me is anything that inspires me or influences me or even antagonizes me in real life. I'll see that has some type of value that I can like put into the act or the persona, and then I either amplify it or like I like reduce it, just depending on what it is. And the more, then it feels more true to me, and then I can, these type of things add kind of layer by layer to it, and it doesn't really feel now like as if like you develop it, rather than just being like, okay, well this is the type of character that I want to go for with things that I find out with myself. But if it's stuff that, like, music is another one, it's a massive influence to me. So there's a lot of music that goes into the persona of it, and fashion for sure, and comedy is another thing that's really important to me. So if it feels kind of right to me, then, and the way I think about it as well is like I try and think about it from. So when I was younger and I started watching wrestling, so much of me was trying to convince a lot of my real life mates that wrestling is cool. So I would always show them like different clips of stuff and be like, no, I know you think wrestling is this, but have a look at this. This is different than what you think it is. And that was part of the kind of running gag that we had. So any time that I'm incorporating something or thinking about something, first of all, it has to feel right to me, and I have to be proud of it and connected to it. And secondly, I think about it through the lens of somebody that's not a wrestling fan, or somebody that has no idea of what wrestling is, or further than that, how my friends would look at it and how would they interpret what's happening.
That's awesome, mate. That's awesome. It's so cool to see how you use all your personal influences to influence your persona. I didn't hear you mention any EastEnders.
No, no, yeah,
In
we'll
that
get
little...
there. Well, that's why I'm with Shah Samuels. Shah Samuels, for anyone who doesn't know, is a proper Londoner wrestler, and he basically sounds like he belongs in the Queen Vic. I think he's barred from the Queen Vic, actually.
Oh, mate. Your next move will be the Pat Butcher.
He did also used to be a butcher, by the way. I'm not even joking. The Shah Butcher.
Oh, I love it, man. Do you remember your first foray abroad with wrestling? How did that feel?
Yeah, so the first place I wrestled abroad was Barcelona in Spain, which at the time I thought, well, I've obviously made it. I am Mick Jagger. And it was like 2009. I was there for 2 weeks. I done like a week-long training camp and then wrestled. It was actually really cool. It was a Japanese company called Dragon Gate, and they were doing their first European tour. And the first night was in Barcelona, and I got to wrestle in one of the kind of earlier matches on that. So being around those boys and seeing Japanese wrestling has an influence on me, or at least it did when I was coming up for sure, and I've always appreciated it. And so being around that and seeing how they kind of operate kind of really was eye opening and valuable to me. And I got to go to Barcelona for 2 weeks and not go to school. It was amazing. Sorry, miss, I didn't do my homework. I was in Barcelona wrestling, so.
That must have been so cool to say to your teachers, especially Mr. McLean. He must have been chuffed for that.
Yeah, no, I didn't mention the word wrestling in front of him anymore. He'd start having flashbacks.
Oh, brilliant, man. That's so funny. So going from like the shows in Barcelona, you started traveling with it. How did that perpetuate into like the WWE? Like, what was the kind of roadmap there?
So obviously, like I said, WWE was always the ultimate goal and the long-term goal, but I was so engaged in what I was doing and loving what I was doing. Like I was wrestling at the weekends. Like at this point when I started, early 20s, even still in my teenage years, I was wrestling every weekend. I was wrestling all sorts of international names. I was traveling here and everywhere. I was doing all these cool shows. So during the week, I would be home for a few days. I would be training, chilling, and then I would do what I was doing at the weekend. And for me, like that was the life, and it still is in some sense. That's what I've always wanted and and I love doing. And I didn't really think like, okay, well, I'll do this for a couple of years and then I'll go WWE and then I'll do, like I didn't have this long term plan. I just focused solely on what was in front of me, like I said, and everything that anytime I'd thought about WWE or like what would be the logical way of me being able to even attempt to like how would I get in, like I used to always think that all the things that held me back would do exactly that, hold me back, so that I'm 5'7" and a half sometimes in a good day. I'm 5'10", right, babe? And like I was Scottish, I had an accent, like I didn't have like a ridiculous physique. So all these factors that you need to be a WWE superstar, in my opinion, I didn't have any of them. So I kind of was just like, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully something else will shine through. But it wasn't really a conscious thought that I was always having, and the way it went was all those factors that I thought were working against me is actually what got me a job. So they done a tournament called the Cruiserweight Classic, which was an international tournament for people under 205, so they could only get small people that are 5'7"-ish.
Yes! Representation for the good guys.
And they needed different countries represented, so I had two: Scotland, Israel. Let's go, sign me up. And then the style of wrestling that I do and the type of performance that I provide was exactly what they needed for that show. So that's kind of what opened the door for me, and that was January 2016. I got the phone call from William Regal, and I missed it because I was playing FIFA and I was getting beat 2-1. So I phoned the man. I was like, I'll just get beat off Exeter City because of you. This better be good.
Do you know how many FIFA points you've lost me?
Yeah. Oh, don't talk to me about FIFA points. I spent way too much money on that. But yeah, and then that was the summertime was when we started filming the classic, and it was very much it was understood that it was to come in to do the tournament, and there was no like promise of anything after that. So it was 4 set of tapings. The first one was in June, second one was in July, and then August and September. But in the July tapings, they'd offered me a full-time contract to move to America in October. So everything happened out of nowhere and really fast. And then it went from being like, oh, this is cool, this is a good, I guess I just looked at it as another achievement. And then I was thinking, well, this is good exposure, good experience, and now I can use this to continue to like ascend on independence and maybe go Japan or whatever. But it can all happen really quickly. And before I knew it, I was doing like the last loop on this show on the Indies over here, and moving from my mum's house straight to America.
That's nuts. Did you take time to just like pause and reflect and just absorb that moment where you got that phone call or that extension of the contract to go full time? Did you ever just like sit with that? Because that journey that you had been on previously to that, never believing that you'd ever make the WWE because of your height, because of your build, because you're Scottish. Did you ever just like sit with that?
At the time, I didn't. I wish I did. I wish I was a bit more self-aware and had that kind of mindfulness at the time. But I was just stuck on go. I'm always stuck on go. Like I have to still remind myself to do that these days. And at first, when I got the phone call, because I knew it was presented as a short-term thing, like I never really kind of fantasized or thought like, oh, this will now lead to a full-time deal. So I would say that it wasn't probably until maybe like a month before I was moving that I had actually stopped to think about it and spoke about it properly with my mates and really tried to understand what my opinion was and where my excitement and fear was, like in all these different things. So I do wish that I had a few moments to reflect during that summer, but it was just pretty wild because as soon as I knew that was the case, then every weekend I was fully booked everywhere and doing the kind of the goodbye loop, if you will. And it just kind of all came at once, as these things do. I do remember though, one of the nicest moments was, so the July tapings, I got offered the contract after the tapings, and Grado was in Orlando at the same time doing stuff for Impact. So we met up after, like it was just by chance that we were both there at the same time because he'd been going back and forth to America also. And I met him after the tapings and went out and celebrated in Orlando, and then we flew back together. Grado's someone that I've travelled with for years and years on independence and one of my closest and oldest mates. So having that moment together was good. And we've had a few of these moments in our careers where it's a bit of a kind of pinch me moment, and it's nice to be able to celebrate that with people that you care and love.
With Grado being such a hallmark of wrestling as well, but you're on you're in the WWE, he's on, or he was, I'm not sure if he's still there, but on Impact, but the WWE has this prestige around it. Was there any sort of like jealousy between him and you because you had this break and he perhaps didn't have the same break?
Yeah, I'm jealous of him that he gets to do pantomime and Scott Squad and all sorts of cool stuff. He gets to hang about Ali McCoist. No, not at all, because our friendship was rooted in real life, so to speak. It wasn't rooted in wrestling, and we didn't. Obviously, we spend most of the time traveling and being around wrestling, but that's not what the connection was built on. And Grado's always had so many different aspirations, and he's so successful in so many lanes, like between doing entertainment, being on TV, doing pantomime, wrestling. And he's never not enjoyed what he's doing. So it's good to, whereas for me, my focus was always just get as high as I can in wrestling. So it's really nice to be able to see just the success he's having in so many different walks of life, and there was never once any type of feeling of that.
I think in Scotland we're actually quite good at that. We're quite good at kind of acknowledging our mates and being happy for them. I think Scotland does have, in terms of young men, I think we are quite good at building a brotherhood and celebrating other successes and not letting that take away from our own.
Yeah.
I don't see that really elsewhere the same.
No, Scotland does for sure have a good community element to it. It's one of the most important things about Scotland, but I do feel that it can be a double-edged sword sometimes, that there is an element of tall poppy syndrome in Scotland. If you know what tall poppy syndrome is, basically, if you imagine a field of poppies, whenever one of them gets too tall, it gets cut down. And I think that in Scotland, like, people are more than happy to put people in position and applaud them and say well done once they've achieved something of stature. But I see it anyway, that when people are in the process of trying something new or trying to develop different parts of life or take a risk or in that element of the grind of whatever it is, like, people are very easy to kind of throw shade and look down on it. And it's not necessarily just a Scottish thing. I do believe that's something that we have culturally that's embedded in all of us, that it's easier to, like, go, that's stupid, why are you doing that, that's daft, get a real job, why are you wasting your time doing this, it's never going to be this, it's never going to be that, do you know? And I felt that on me at such a young age, for sure, from teachers, from family, from friends, and in some sense you can understand where it comes from, because it would seem like that's the safe thing to do, is to, like, oh, maybe that's not going to work out, like, maybe you should just do something secure, and there is an element of truth to that, but I think that shouldn't go in the face of supporting people and just offering people love without it having to be the condition of a meritocracy where they have to achieve something before you go, oh yeah, do you know what, yeah, well done, I always knew you could do it, bro. I'm like, no, you didn't.
And I think that fragility comes from perhaps predominantly being working class around these areas as well. You're told to be careful, be secure, go to college, go to university, do a trade, because it's seen from the outside in secure. And if you're from this working class background, like the arts or podcasting or whatever else it's fragile and it's not secure, and it's not been, the way hasn't been paved before. And we kind of shy away from imposter syndrome. We kind of denote it to, like, being a negative thing. But I always think imposter syndrome's a fucking great thing, because it reminds you that you're creating something into existence that already doesn't exist.
Yep, absolutely.
And I get slagged for this podcast as well, mate. I get slagged. Like, what is little David from his bedroom, what's he doing? Why does he deserve a platform? Why is he speaking with these people? But don't.
Oh, sorry, you go back.
I'm just saying the tortoise only makes progress when its neck sticks out, and that's what I'm doing with this. That's what you've been doing your entire career, mate.
Absolutely, and the tortoise always wins the race, and more importantly than that, like, you don't see a tortoise as roadkill too often. It's all these people that try and go too fast that end up as roadkill. So it is, but that, unfortunately, people do throw shade as a reflection of themselves or where they're at, or maybe they have something. Everyone has something that they're passionate about and that they want to create or they want to do, and it doesn't always need to be as extravagant as going into the arts. It can be something small in some sense, and it doesn't obviously need to completely take away from the security of their life. But if people are scared to do something for whatever reason, then it puts them in a position to feel like it's much easier to then hate on other people that's doing it, and that's not really beneficial, firstly, for the person that's throwing that shade and throwing that hate. Like, that's part of you now, never mind who's receiving it on the other end of it, you know. So I think that I think it's strange that we put so much we put so many celebrities and entertainment sources and these things in our life on a pedestal, but when we see it in real life, we don't have the same type of respect and love for it. Like, people will more than happy watch X Factor every Saturday night and be like supportive and this person's amazing, and see a final product of someone, or see someone that's done 15 years to become an overnight success. I'm going to stop using these. I've used them about 4 times. I use these way too much, don't I? Yeah, I use them loads. So I'll stop right now. I'm like Dr. Evil. But yeah, I think that they will be happy to watch X Factor and you know, applaud these things, but the busker in the street or the guy that's putting YouTube videos up singing songs every day, regardless of the fact that it's getting 13 views or 30,000, people will look down on that, and I think that's something that maybe has to get brought up to more mainstream discussion.
Oh, mate, 100%. You need to find your tribe, I think, because I even see that with my mates, right? Not my mates, but people I went to school with and stuff. They'll share the stories of celebrities who are doing a new endeavor, or X has brought out a new album, but they won't share my podcast.
Yeah.
Or they'll share like the Joe Rogans of the world, but they won't share my work. And I'm like, come on, there's a bit of a disconnect here. Like, They don't need your share. I do, and you're my
Yeah.
mate. Like, please help out. Or they'll go in and complain about their work, but they'll share their work's Instagram. And I'm like, you
Mhm.
complain about that, but I'm your mate and you're supportive of me, but you won't share my work. And we have this huge cringe culture in Scotland as well.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Cringe culture is really that and tall poppy syndrome together for sure, mate.
Yeah, and I think I wonder. I ask you about this because I've seen this with my podcast. Like, as I've spoke with really complex people on the podcast, my taste and traits have kind of developed and changed. Like speaking with neuroscientists, CEOs, people like yourself, people in the creative industry as well. I can see myself develop as a character. And I had one mate who I had not seen for a couple of years, but he stayed watching the podcast. And I caught up with him not too long ago. And he said to me, "David, you've changed." And I was like, "I'd like to hope so."
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm just curious to know for you, as you started touring and especially at a young age, being around these like-minded people, did you find yourself develop as a human being, and then on the flip to that, coming back to Scotland and not being accepted in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, change is the only permanence in life. Like, you can't not change. Everything changes. That's what life is. Life has changed. So, like you said, if people are saying you've changed, then you should want to change. And I'm assuming that the change is always in a positive flow. And a lot of times, if people are saying that in a slightly negative way, it's because whatever version of you exists in their head has changed, and they're not comfortable with that. And to me, the most exciting thing about life is learning and being curious and discovering.
It's the
And I
process,
know
right?
the difference between me with less knowledge or understanding or whatever then to now, and how much of a positive influence it's had in my life and the people that are important to me. So I just think everyone gets too caught up in like how they identify themselves or how other people think of them. And once you start living in other people's opinions of you're really restricted at that point. And for sure, to answer your question, like, I was around such a interesting walk of life from such a young age. From 14, 15, I was around all the characters that you get in wrestling, and traveling here, there, and everywhere, and some good characters, some bad characters, but either way, I was exposed to so much influence. And then those people that I had met and at a young age who were older, that became like mentors to me, and they really helped me mature and understand life and look at things differently, and at least offer different perspective, which then allowed me to continually build upon my perspective and how I see things and how I would like to be in life. And that's an ongoing process, and I seek that out. Like, I don't ever feel like I get to a point where I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm good now. Like, this version of me is cool. And like I'm always trying to learn, or I'm always trying to be inspired or understand, or even if it's something that I disagree with, like, I'm welcoming that, because I want to hear things that I disagree with, because I don't want to be attached to what I think I know. Because the more conclusions you put on stuff, the more you're deciding to like close off that part of your life, whatever it is.
I really like this version of you. Like, we get to see you on social media as a performer in the ring, but we don't see this complex character of you, Noam. What I'm curious about is really, how will I phrase this? I guess now that you have these shiny objects, like your pictures in the ring verified on Instagram, hundreds of thousands of followers, people will look at that. Your friends might look at that. People locally look at that, and they want that because they see the
Mm.
highlights, but they don't want everything else. Like,
Mm.
for example, look at Elon Musk. They want to own Tesla. They want to be this entrepreneur, but that guy works 7 days a week and is always on. They don't want that. So
Mm.
it's so nice to hear what kind of makes you tick and what it takes to be the complex character that you are. But do you
Mm.
ever notice that with your mates or just people locally, that they want these kind of shiny objects that you have, but they don't actually want the substance underneath, or they don't respect the substance underneath?
Yeah, I do think people have like a unhealthy relationship with social media and what stuff means. Like, and it will influence. It's one thing to appreciate it and understand it, and it's a wonderful tool. Like, social media connects so many amazing people together, and as a business, it's very useful to me that I've used these things again. You need to punch me, I'll use them again. As a business, it's really useful to me to be able to promote and to present a certain type of image, but that's all it is. Like, it's a presentation, and people do this with their personal Instagrams as well. They put out a highlight reel of their life, so to speak, or what they think will impress other people or make other people jealous of them or look up to them or whatever. And even if it's a very unconscious decision, that's still part of the game, because that's what social media is, or specifically Instagram and Twitter. Like it's showing off in some element. Like very few people use it to just show who they are, or connect with people who are in the same place. And obviously there is an area of social media that deals with that. But I think, generally speaking, to what we are talking about, like in normal society, I do find that people fixate on it and think it means more than the actual life itself that you're living. And a lot of my mates will like, oh, you've got this many followers, or get this many likes in 5 minutes, or all these random metrics that actually don't mean anything, unless of course you need them to mean something specific. But that is what a tool is. Like if you need to hammer something into the wall, and by that I don't do any DIY, 21st century modern man. I've never hung a shelf up in my life, but I'd imagine, I'd imagine life are real. I'd imagine if you need to hang something up, you need a tool. So you use the tool when you have it for a specific purpose, and then you let go of it. You don't then attach your whole identity to this hammer and think out, why is my hammer different than everyone else's hammer, and I need all the lights and whistles on my hammer. And you can tell I really don't know anything about hammers, mate. Lights and whistles. but yeah, there's but also there's not enough, like, there's just not enough data and research on the effect of social media and technology that it's having on people, and that's going to catch up eventually once we've had 50 years of this being part of our life. In the same way that when cigarettes came about, like there was doctors on TV advertising how healthy they were, and that was the only news source that people had at the time, was either a newspaper or a couple of channels on the TV, and told that cigarette smoke was healthy, and that smoking was cool, and that everyone done it, and it's the coolest. And now we've got the evidence in the literature to show that no, it's actually really detrimental to your health. And I think that will happen the same with social media and technology.
I think my next guest is a gentleman called Dr. Eric Dimer, and he is a kind of researcher into like the impact of AI, machine learning, technology regulation and stuff like that. And it's going to be such a fascinating chat, and I'm going to definitely take some of this into that chat. And I had a similar experience last night when I was out in the bar. Someone said to me, "Oh, David, I've not seen you in 2 years. You met the Queen. That's amazing. Like that must have been like, you must have been so happy." And I'm like, actually, that was the most depressive time of my life, because my whole life had been catalyzed for that moment. Every single day I write in my positive affirmation, in my journal as a positive affirmation, I'll be recognized by society and someone with significance for my impact on communities. I will leave a legacy that's unique and concrete. I write it every single day. And that kind of was birthed from losing my mum, my whole North Star changing and my motivations changing. And when I met the Queen, like that, I ticked that box. I did that. And the very next day I was like, well, what's next? I'm 21 at the time. I was 21 at the time. I lost my mum that year. I met the Queen. These two significant events that I would have assumed that would have happened in my 40s or whatever happened at 21. So someone said to me last night, like, "Oh, David, you must be so proud, or you must be so happy." And I'm like, mate, you don't realize that might not be the case. What you see in social media might not be the case. And I'm just curious to know, just to kind of flip this onto you, when you got the full-time contract with WWE, did you have that similar moment of kind of despair and loss to an extent?
For sure, like, and that's the nature of life. It's not achieving your purpose; it's having a purpose to seek continually. So, but again, at that time of life, I wasn't really aware of that, the reality of human intelligence working as such. I found that you have such an idea of what something should feel like, and so much of being in WWE, a lot of times I didn't even really let myself fantasize too much about it, because then the way I was wired would make me feel like I would get sad about it, as if, because it was like never going to happen. So then I wouldn't fantasize too much about it. So I never really even considered what it'd be like, other than it would be the best thing ever. And it is the best thing ever, and I'm so grateful to be in WWE, and I've had an amazing journey and continue to stay on that journey. But there was elements of it where it was a massive feeling of deflation and not kind of, when you work for something for so long, when you don't even really realize you're consciously working to that thing, and then it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. That takes a lot of recalibrating. At least it did for me, and it took a bit of period of time where, for me, the thing that changed was, so the goal was to get to WWE or to make a full-time living from wrestling. You know, that was the purpose. That was the adventure I was on. And then once I had achieved that, then what came after that was like, and now it's just like, now I've bought into the game. Like now it can really start. And like that's the place I'm at now. Like now I'm in a whole new process, and I have a whole new purpose. And I'm sure that in any time I achieve like milestones or goals, especially ones that are like externally validated, like you said, from mates, or, you know, for example, like I just got my first action figure last week, and so that will get a lot of positive response from people, and they'll like that, to them that's a validation of some metric of success, but it doesn't feel any different for me, other than I just think it's really cool because I used to play with action figures all the time, and it's as another milestone, and it's reaffirming, and but it doesn't deviate me from the path or what my main objectives are. Because if I set my goals as these like external things, and once I hit them, like you said, there's now I have less motivation, or I'm then restricted by that boundary that I've set myself.
Oh mate, I love that insight, mate. And I even, when you put up the story on your Instagram of the action figure, I replied, I was like, oh my god, this is every kid's dream. This is every young boy or girl's dream. But yeah, mate, and one thing that I'm curious about as well, that I'm playing thought pinball
By
here.
the way, the action figure comes out in March. Buy your action figure right now. Externally validate me. Get the action figure with a lockdown here. Yeah.
He needs that. He needs that, or he won't thrive.
It's not good about having an action figure, to be honest, mate.
Oh, but mate, one thing I'm really curious about, and I'll kind of rack my brain around this, but I touched on it earlier, because you are a performer, right? You do have to wear somewhat of a facade, an ego. You're not truly authentic. You're like you said, an extension of yourself. You turned up to 100. What I'm kind of scared about, perhaps if I were to develop as a performer on a podcast, would be that the ego is only able to receive praise, not love. So if someone's complimenting you for what you do, or complimenting what they see on social media, you don't take that as love. It can only be praise. But similarly, if someone criticizes you, I guess it's a defense mechanism, because it's the persona and the ego that gets the criticism, not you. Do you ever feel that though? Like, do you ever feel kind of disenfranchised from the love that you get because it isn't you sitting on the couch? It isn't this version that I've got today on Zoom.
Well, I think the ego translates praise into love, and that's where people get tripped up. They then think that they think themselves that praise is what love is, and the ego is a defense mechanism. It wants to say in the past condition or the past identity that you think you have, or that people are giving you, and I think there's sometimes, I think when people talk about the ego, there's like a misunderstanding of that it has a really important use, but it's finding how to aim it on things that are useful and they're not just important to you specifically. You know, there's a way of like, so for example, like I'll attach my ego, so to speak, if we want to simplify it in such a way, to learning and to getting better, and something like, to understand it, to get successful, to be better, I have to fail. So whereas before, like, the ego would maybe defend you or even make you avoid anything that might feel like failure, or any situation where you are going to fail, but then that's where like development is, that's where success is. There's no success without failure. So now before, when I was younger, like I would shy away from things that might put me in a position where I take an L, but now I seek that out, because I know that that's me at the maximum level of proximal development. So that's from an ego place, and that you're using it for you, rather than being like, oh well, I want to learn to do this, but I'm only going to learn to play the piano if I'm the best at playing the piano. Yeah. This is very restrictive. Whereas if every time I show up to play the piano, I don't play the piano, by the way, but every time I show up to play the piano, let's just say for the example's sake, any time that I'm hitting the wrong note, I'm getting closer to hitting the right note. That's just how that's just how progress works. There's no way around it, really.
Oh, mate, the self-development nerd in me is just like frothing at the mouth, man. I love that. I was so insightful, man. And I guess, yeah, people always say, "Oh, I'm not going to do a podcast because I don't want to suck," or "I'm a perfectionist." I hate the term perfectionist because perfectionism and being mediocre are the exact same thing. They're things to hide behind.
Yeah, 100%.
But mate, like failing is like creating a callus of the mind, as David Goggins would say.
Yeah.
I love hearing examples of like therapists who have, for example, people come to them who are scared of rejection. So what they say to them is, walk down the beach and say hello to every single person you walk past. And 99% of the time, they look at you weird and they won't say hi back. But you'll get one person that will say hello, and just keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing that, and then you build that callus. And that's essentially what you brought to life there, mate. And just that insight about the ego, it was absolutely brilliant, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Oh, mate, I love that.
You have to have faith. Also, you have to have faith in understanding that you're not. I think everyone feels like they need to have a feeling or a motivation before they have action, but action always comes first. And to that example, walking down the beach and doing exposure therapy and saying hello to people, like you don't know what it's going to feel like until you're there, and it's not going to feel comfortable. But by definition, if someone's making you feel uncomfortable, then there's some type of development or change happening, and that's maybe the stimulus you need. Like if you go to the gym and you're only training in a comfortable zone, then you're never going to. You might enjoy it and you might be useful, and that's to say that maybe that's what you want to do. That's a specific reason you're going. But most people are going with the intention of some type of progress, I'd imagine, in the gym. But if you're only ever training in what you're comfortable with, then you're going to feel good, but you're never going to, break out of that box, so to speak. And I think that's a good example of just making yourself say hello to people, or any other type of small step towards whatever you want to improve on, and make the steps as digestible as possible. Like people have, mentioning perfectionism. Usually you're right. Like I feel the same, that it's an avoidance really to even get started. Like everything has to be perfect before I start doing something. I need this lined up. I need to have all my ducks in order before I start something. But the best way to perfect anything is just get started and feel okay with stumbling around in the dark.
One thing I've always done, and I still live by it, is I always say yes, take the leap, and trust that future David will have it worked out.
Yeah.
Always do that. Always do that. Since a kid.
Yeah. Because he's either going to have it work out or not, but that's the game of life, really.
And probably the latter is the more important part. When you have to adapt, mold, and find this new facet and grab that new tool that you didn't know existed, or grab that new app within your software that you didn't know existed.
Yeah.
That's the fun part.
For sure, mate.
Mate, I absolutely love this self-development rabbit hole, but I'm going to go back to wrestling. When you first went over to America, or you were starting living in America, how would you describe air when you were on the road? I need to know that.
Well, first of all, every American thinks that Scotland is just one giant field and we all live together.
In kilts.
Hey man, you're from Scotland? I've been to Loch Ness.
Me, I'm not even joking. I had a girl on a night out when I was in London in November.
Show off. Must be nice.
No, she was like a foreign exchange student, and she was from America, and she went, "Oh, you're from Scotland. Do you know Alan from Aberdeen?" I just played on it. I was like, "No way, you know Alan from Aberdeen."
Yes, babe, sure. Tell me more. That's funny. Yeah, but I think it's hard. I don't know how much people that did take an interest beyond me saying it was near Glasgow. Then I would say that it's just because Ayr really is a town to what we think a town is, but in some sense it's just a big village, and it's a coastal town at that. So, or at least I think it is. And when you compare it to other towns and cities and stuff, and it's just a combination of villages really is around the town of it. And I don't know what the actual specific definitions of a town is. And I think you need to have like a city hall or this or that, or you need to have 3 Gregs. We've got 4 Gregs in here in the space of 2 miles.
Top of the Greg's leaderboard.
Yeah, and yeah, I would just say it was a small coastal town, and then I was like, have you ever seen Lord of the Rings? You know, Hobbiton? It's a little bit like that. But Gandalf isn't as cool. He's just a weird guy outside Greg's.
Oh, I love it, man. And I'm not sure if this might be correct, but I've heard of some of the kind of schedules of the kind of big stars, and some of them are like on the road 200 days of the year.
Yeah.
What's the day in the life like when you're at peak season?
So well, it depends. If you're on Raw, you'll do Raw TVs on Monday night, and obviously things might have slightly changed after lockdown and everything. But let's just say when I was there before lockdown, Raw was on the Monday night, so you would do live events or house shows Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you would do TV on the Monday, and then you'd go home on the Tuesday, and that would be the kind of loop most weeks. And then, of course, obviously, a lot of talent will then have media commitments, they'll have appearances, they'll have all sorts of other things going on. So but that is the life of it, and for some people they love it, and for other people they find parts of it extremely difficult. Obviously, if you've got families, traveling is really hard. At the time, that I had no restrictions in that sense, so I was all about it, and I was used to traveling.
You've been around some big stars in your time as well. Who's been the biggest names you've been around, and who's been the hardest working that you've seen?
Oh,
You've met The Rock, right?
yeah, that was actually a really good moment. So it was in LA at the Staples Center, and they were filming Fighting with My Family, the Page movie. And right before Raw, they film Raw and Raw goes live. They do a show called Main Event, which is usually just like 30 minutes of just a couple of exhibition matches, just to kind of get the crowd warm. And then it's also content on the network and some other sites. And I was wrestling on that, and right before Raw went live, The Rock went out and done a promo to the house and said, "Look, if everyone can stay after Raw, we're going to film some of Fighting My Family. If you can stay for be the audience and get on." Basically, just The Rock having the ability to tell 10,000 people to just sit and watch more after watching 3.5 hours of wrestling. He's like, "Yeah, I'm The Rock. You're just going to stay here for me." And they're like, "Yeah." So I had wrestled the last match on Main Event and came backstage, and it was maybe like 10 to 8 right before, or 10 to 5 even on the West Coast right before Raw went live. And just I walked through the curtain, I bumped right into him. And I was like, "You're the Tooth Fairy! Oh my god!" And
Man, he must have
that was a
looked
real
at
cool
you
moment.
like you must have looked at you like you were like a protein bar, like
Yeah,
5'5", probably 30 grams of protein in them.
something from Jumanji that he had to fight. No, but he was really cool and asked me if I had a good time and looked fun, and yeah, that was a really good moment. He was just really cool to meet. I think that's a kind of out with wrestling, like he transcends so much, doesn't he? So
Yeah.
John Cena was always someone that was really helpful. Like he would always watch all the cruiserweight stuff, and he would watch all of 205 Live, which was a separate show that we would do that would be on after SmackDown. So he would sit and watch it, and then he would always give people feedback and advice. And most people, don't do that. So I think that's just a reflection of how hard he works. But everyone knows that. I'd say that it's really hard to choose one person. Everyone works so hard. Like when you get to that level of any industry, and these are all top 1%ers, and they're all animals. Roman Reigns is someone as well that just is non-stop, go, and watching him at such a high level, and then coming back from his time off to straight back to such a high level, and seeing how it works in real life, and watching it week in, week out, and then obviously not being around it and seeing it from this side, it's just it doesn't go said enough.
Laced throughout WWE history, when we have icons such as Roman Reigns, John Cena, most prominently, The Rock, they kind of use, I don't know if it's intentional, but I'm guessing it is, they use WWE as a platform to kind of extrapolate their career. They go off into movies, and for example, The Rock's the most, I think he's labeled the most iconic human in history at the moment, right?
Yeah, wild.
I just want to know, I'm just making observations from what you've told me previously. Do you actually want that? Because I think you're more scared of success than you are failure. You seem to love failure. I think you're, just from an observation, I think you're more scared of the success than you are the failure. And that might be completely wrong, but would you, how would you answer that question?
Well, I try and set my life up. The foundation of my life is peace, joy, and love, and then anything on top of that is then what creates my life, rather than the other way about. A lot of people think you have to achieve certain things to then have these states that are always available to us as humans, and that's a whole different conversation. But to answer your question, there's nothing I'm really resistant to, and I don't do well thinking beyond my station really, because then I know that I'm taking focus, attention, and energy away from where I'm at. So like it doesn't, and the only time that ever exists is now. So it doesn't really matter if in 10 years I would like to do this, I'd like to do that. If I'm not focusing 100% on what I'm doing right now, then I'll never arrive at these places. And then even if I do arrive at these places, I'll be disconnected to them and I won't be all in on them. So I truly stay focused 100 on what I'm doing, and then whatever comes from that to me is the joy of the process. Like if 10 years ago someone was to itemize my life the way it is now, so to speak, like I wouldn't think that I probably wouldn't think it was possible, or even if I did, then I would be so fixated on achieving these goals that then maybe it'd actually be counterproductive and deviate from me, because I would be so tunnel visioned on the things that I think I need to achieve rather than being tunnel visioned on the stuff that I need to do that's right in front of me.
No, mate, I'm listening, I'm learning. If this wrestling thing doesn't work out for you, mate, you've got a podcast ready for you. You've got books to be written, mate. So wise. I mean, I love it. And, mate,
I don't need a podcast. Rasheen listens to this every day, don't you, babe? She loves it.
She's so self-developed now.
She loves it. She loves
it is so nerdy though. This is nerdy, right? But I love it, mate. I absolutely love it. Kind of wrap the bow around this, and it's probably the most contentious question that everyone's asked: is wrestling fake?
No. Oh, it could be faker.
You wish it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a redundant question. It's like asking, is movies fake? It's like asking, a podcast fake? It's like asking, is theatre fake? Like, but obviously people have their opinions and what they categorize as fake or real. But it's like asking if any other type of entertainment source is fake. Like I said, so I think it's so, like, it's you get it all the time, and it's such a cliche question now. And I've had over the last however many years I've been wrestling, I've always had a different type of answer, and a lot of times it came from a defensive place where people are like, is wrestling fake? And I go, sharp as this, and push in their face. I literally done that at school one time. Don't do that, kids.
To Mr. McLean, I gave him another flashback.
So, but yeah, I just feel no ways about it, and I think that, like, also people, that's the whole point of entertainment. Like, you like something, you don't like something, that's the enjoyment of it. So I almost find it more interesting to hear people's opinions as to why they categorize it as fake, or what makes them think that, because that's more useful to me as a creator of it, to find out what these tells are. The same way, like, nobody questions if magic is real. Like, spoiler alert, he doesn't actually pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Mate, next you'll be telling me Santa's not real.
Yeah, well, I'm Jewish, mate. I don't know who he is. I've heard of this guy. Santa Claus, have you ever met him?
I hope your new house doesn't have a chimney. You'll be seeing him soon.
Yeah. I'll make one for him.
But it's scripted, right? Like, the outcome's predetermined. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a TV show. Do you know what I mean? And then it's having the ability to know how to present it and do it in such a way. And the thing is, like, maybe 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, these conversations were a bit more ambiguous. But nowadays, like when I first started watching wrestling, I couldn't just go on an iPhone and Google it and find out everything about how it works. You can do that with anything nowadays. But in some sense, I think that's what now makes it even more enjoyable for people, because you're allowing people to understand what it is, and then, like I said earlier, like, understanding it's make-believe, and then when it's done well, we make you believe, and that is what suspends people's disbelief. And the same as what a magician does, and the same as what theatre does. Nobody thinks that Game of Thrones is real, and nobody thinks that there's actually dragons, and that, like, people get bought into it and they buy into it and they emotionally connect. So in my opinion, it's same but different.
For me, it makes me really appreciate the craft. Much like when people slam the comedy scene for going towards a more politically correct side of things. I actually think that's great because it makes the comedians be more innovative. They've got more cones to kind of dance around. And I think when you understand that wrestling, yeah, there is a predetermined outcome. This has all been set. Watching the wrestlers kind of adapt around that and mold into this performance, I think it makes it more fantastic to watch.
Yeah.
And I've seen some clips online before, like some improv scenes where things have went wrong. Has that happened to you before? Do you have to improvise a lot?
Oh, for sure. That's a big skill in wrestling that you need is improvisation, especially on an independent scene. When maybe things aren't as structured as they are for a TV show. Having that ability is essential, and then also knowing how to enjoy it, and really that's where some of the best learning happens, because it's in the moment on your feet, and then it kind of either shows you like, well, that was a disaster, let's try and make sure that doesn't happen again, and how many fail safes can we build in, like how many variables can you control for these things to happen less likely, or to make them less likely, excuse me. And then on the other side of that, things will happen spontaneously that then you'll then start deliberately building into the act from something that just came out of an organic moment.
That's amazing to hear. I'm also curious to know, like I don't want to call them props, but like the tables, ladders, chairs, are these all real?
Yeah, they're all legit. Yeah, yeah. This is the biggest biggest misunderstanding is that all the physicality in wrestling is 100% real. Like, there's no way of getting around these things. Like, it's not like it's cuts in a camera and okay, and then somebody comes and breaks the table for us and they will lie down. Like, all these things are like, that's why I said it could be fake in some sense. And what people don't recognize is that obviously there's certain ways of doing stuff safer than not, of course, but that's part of the art form. Like you said, people's schedules, like, they're going to be wrestling about 200 times a year, some guys. So to put your body in that position and in that risk zone that many times over a year, like MMA fighters or UFC fighters, okay, let's take something that is the realist. UFC fighters, if they're highly active, they'll fight 4 times a year. And they'll fight 4 times a year, and sometimes that'll be a 1 minute fight, a 2 minute fight. They might not even take any damage, depending on obviously how the fight goes and how good they are. Whereas wrestlers are putting their body on the line X amount of times a year, and also have a certain standard to maintain and uphold. Like, nobody gets upset if Conor McGregor walks into a fight and drops somebody in 13 seconds. But if that happened in every wrestling match, probably like, what's going on here? Raw is on for 20 minutes. What's happening? Like, so the exposure to damage is way higher than any other industry. I think so. Anyway.
Do you think that's why you're so present when it comes to what you do? Because you know it could potentially just end like that because of, I guess, the longevity crisis. Because like you could get an injury off a turnbuckle or something like that could end your career there and then. Do you think that's why you're so focused on the there and now? And equally, how do you negate having poor longevity? Do you have to train around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it is how you look after your body. That's one of your most important hardwares. And then it's beyond that is how do you repeat that process over a long period of time, and then how you perform. Like, you may be performing in a certain way right now, and you might be doing certain moves or looking at matches in a certain way right now, but is that repeatable over 20 years or 10 years or 25 years or 5 years? Like, what is the outcome of that? Somebody like Randy Orton, for example, has been at the highest level for over 20 years now, and has not only continued to develop and have different elements to him, he's also prioritized staying safe, and to the point where now you're seeing the best version of him, really, which is for most, if you look at it as a sport, which it is, most sportsmen and women, they would only dream of having a career that long with that amount of activity. Do you feel me? So, like, I think that's essential. I think having an understanding of all the different things that can go wrong, and then the severity in which can come from these things going wrong, like you said, like you mentioned a turnbuckle. You know, if you are going off the top rope every night, there's much more risk involved in that than if you don't go to the top rope every night. So you have to understand the potential outcomes of these, and then of course you can only understand a certain amount of them because there is freak accidents or things that you can't prepare for. Excuse me, things you can't prepare for, things that you don't see coming. So that's all factors into it.
I don't want to take much more of your morning, mate, or your afternoon now. But bearing that in mind, what would you say is next for Noam Dar then, in terms of full self-actualization?
Just absolutely run through the entire WWE and get to the top and show everyone that I'm the best at this.
I love it, mate. I said I have this new trend where I ask the current guest, ask the next guest a question. I've got a technologist, kind of technology futurist coming on, talk about AI, machine learning, everything metaverse, that kind of stuff.
Oh,
do you have a question for him?
Okay, so on the metaverse, I recently heard that, I don't know which one it was, that someone bought the house next to Snoop Dogg's. I would like to know if I can buy the other side and how much he thinks it's going to be. Because if we move into a digital realm, I want to be next door to Snoop Dogg, obviously.
Mate, I want to be bottom bunking your bunk beds in, mate. Over there.
Snoop Dogg, that's as close as I'm going to get.
Oh, mate, this was an absolute pleasure, mate. I was so engaged, so present. Thank you for your time, mate. You didn't need to do this. Absolute legend. I've been fanboying the whole time. I've been such a self-development nerd throughout. Thank you, mate. If people want to get in touch and share their love for you, I don't know if you want that, but if you do, where can people find you online?
At Noam Dar from most platforms. Everything's there, really. There's not many people with that daft name, so
no ham in the fridge.
No ham in the fridge _87.
Oh, mate, honestly, absolute pleasure. I hope I can do this again with you sometime, mate.
Man.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, mate.